break. I'm now pleased to invite a few people to make sort of short reflections, and then we'll have a panel discussion between a few of the guests before we finish. I'm pleased now to introduce Tim, and Tim Keilty works for the New Prospects Association in the northeast of England and as an associate with In Control Scotland. He is a qualified social worker and has trained hundreds of people across the UK and Australia in person-centred planning, support planning, self-directed support, and encouraging creative solutions. Tim, if you could turn your video and microphone on, and I'll hand over to you for some short reflections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I feel like an interloper, really, to be honest. I think I'm here to talk about social work. I'm a seriously lapsed social worker. And I suppose my reflections of today are that, I don't know, like everybody's kind of said a lot of this, this sounds really disrespectful. Everybody said kind of a lot of the same stuff, haven't they, that we've kind of, the system's got it completely wrong, and it has done for a long time. Loads of the stuff I did with children was with look after children, particularly in Middlesbrough, where I was just astounded that we would spend £6,000 a week to send young people away, but found it really difficult to find £20 a week to keep people with their families, you know. So that bit of unless we radically change the way that we look after children in the neighbourhoods, where will continue to be knackered. And I think loads of the stories of trauma that Annalisa and Molly and Claire talked about in Cormac as well, and you know, through all of people's presentations, in my experience, at the start of a lot of big, long, traumatic, expensive stories is a really small ask that was ignored by the state and often by social workers. So I'm a very lapsed social worker. When I started doing social work, there used to be the people's representative to the state, and then all of a sudden it turned into the state's kind of boss of the people. So I do think there's some massive possibility in social work if we're get our heads out our backsides. That's my philosophical approach. Yeah, so I think if we can figure out a way of supporting people locally really quickly, listening to those really small asks that people often come up with. So people might come up with that ask themselves, you know, I'm really struggling, blah, 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 blah. As somebody might say, I've got real concerns about this family, rather than, yeah, why don't we figure out how we could be most helpful in people's lives rather than drag people through the systems that we've kind of created. I think that's all I've got to say, to be honest.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. Next up, Angela, if you'd like to turn your video and microphone on, that'd be great. And Tim, if you could turn yours off, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm Angela from Wigan, and I'm not very good at this kind of stuff because I'm the kind of person who likes to reflect on what I've heard, you know, either by going for a walk or having a bath or something. So I'm just going to talk about what struck me from each of the different presentations, and possibly wind in a little bit of kind of what I think and feel as part of that too. You know, I'd love a copy of those poems that both Claire and Molly shared at the beginning, you know, and there was something in Claire's that for me that stood out, that was about trust, you know, that things changed when trust appeared, and why did it take so long? You know, and there was something in Molly's around all trying to change me, you know, and how that happens so often, that the person who is traumatised becomes the person who needs to change, you know, that was really what I took from those poems personally. And then Cormac came in with the heart, and from him, I kind of got to think about, what I really took from him. And I think that what I've taken from him is about my own practice around going home and like kind of community building where I live with friends. And I think Jill's here on the call. Is this of like, instead of holding legislators to account, hold each other in our house, in our street, not Wall Street. I really took that from what Cormac was saying to us today. And then Trina, I really felt class, and I really felt, that's what resonated with me. That's what I picked up. And around it, there was something that she said around desperation to do the right thing, and difficult to exist as a professional in this space. I know, actually, like what Tim has just said about really, is that often, useful outsiders and professionals are wanting to be liberated, to be able to do the things that Kathy described, to develop longer term relationships with people that they do care about. And then when Annalisa spoke, I just got a sense of like the importance of peer support and peer networks, and how those spaces create power, and enable that reclaiming and reframing and healing. And it made me think about some work that we've been doing as a community where I live around domestic abuse, and bringing people together who have had experience of domestic abuse to start to talk about that. And out of that space, a little CIC, a little community interest company, has grown with a woman who, just like Annalisa, doesn't like the term birth parent. She prefers tummy mummy, and that's what she's set up, a CIC to bring together women who might have children living in care. And it just made me think about how, we don't know where that's going to go or what that's going to create, but how those gifts and skills and talents and passions and experience exists within community. And if we create the conditions and we create the space, then who knows what can flourish in that space, and who knows how that kind of process can enable people to heal their own trauma and see how they can put those skills into good use with other people in community. And then Harriet provided us with the statistics, which made me angry and depressed me. But it also made me think too, that where I live in Wigan, children's services at the minute, budgets are overspent by £17 million. And the solution to that has been that our Director of Children's Services has put in a bid to the council to get an extra 5 million. And they're using that 5 million to create another tier of extra special social workers. And none of that money dribbles down into neighbourhood and community. And as I was listening to Harriet talk about some excellent community-based services, I was thinking, why is it that we always start in co-production space and not in community space, and look at what we have already got that we could connect up? So what can we do ourselves in that space? And it took me back to working in Netherton in the late 2000s, late 90s, when my youngest son was born. And at that time, it had a massively rich associational life. It had loads of difficulties, but there were loads of parent and toddler groups and preschool learning alliances. And informal networks, kind of where people kind of played on the field and looked after each other. And then along came Sure Start, and along came Health and Safety, and along came Ofsted. And neighbours really and parents were told that actually what you're doing isn't good enough, so go home, because here are the experts who are going to show you how to do it. And then austerity came along, and services retracted and disappeared, and what was left was very, very little of a fabric of a neighbourhood. And so I think we really need to hold that in mind when we see this new investment that's coming in through family hubs, and we think about community services, is that first of all, we have to discover what we've got, because we can't know what we need until we know what's already connected. And sometimes what we need is not more services. We actually need, economic justice, or in the words of Mauricio Lynn Miller of Up Together, why make poverty tolerable when we can make it escapable? We give people more service rather than look at ways of people creating pathways out of poverty. And then Kathy as well, with the personal story and the whole idea of the market and shifting, I think, to community wealth building, which is what we're kind of hoping to do in Wigan, where I live, because it certainly is the antidote, isn't it, to public management, is to look at what we've got, and then we know what we've got, then we can look at what support we might need from others, and then we can look at kind of what we expect or we want other people to do for us, so that we can work in complete partnership. And that's what we're hoping to do in Wigan, where I live, in my little neighbourhood of 12,000 people, is to see if we can become a self-renovating and self-flourishing neighbourhood. And that's why I'm really involved as one of the founders of Neighbourhood Democracy movement, because we're looking for fellow travellers who want to share the journey together so that we can all flourish. And I think I've probably spoke for more than 5 minutes, but thank you for listening.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Angela. Apologies, I forgot to read your bio out before we started, but you're involved in all sorts of good and amazing projects in Wigan, including Wigan Can, Northern Heart Soul, and as you said, the Neighbourhood Democracy movement. Next up, I'm going to invite Simon Duffy, and Simon is the founder and director of Citizen Network Research, formerly the Centre of Welfare Reform. They're affiliated, and then also the president of the Citizen Network Co-op. Simon is best known for his work on self-directed support, basic income, and the keys to citizenship. I'll hand over to you now, Simon.
Okay, I'll try and be really quick. I suppose I just put this a bit in context for what are we trying to do with the It's Our Community programme. So that Joe, right at the beginning, talked about kind of 3 possible points of change. And in a way, I'll start with the least likely, which is politics. But I think it is worthwhile thinking about the mess that our national politics has made of social care for decades. As long as I've been involved in social care, so I'm getting grey. I started my kind of career in 1990, so that's 30 years. Government has set the agenda for social care from the top down, and it has done so incompetently. The rhetoric actually has remained pretty consistent. What it's done is fragmented, confused, disempowered the local, the community. Citizenship itself is nowhere in view. Why do I start that way? Well, there's a funny thing going on at the moment. We're locked into a kind of decade of Tory misrule. The left, what's sometimes called progressives, are in disarray and disorganized. Social care continues on its path. Politicians still, some of the left, still talk about developing kind of cross-party solutions for reforming social care. And it's probably a lot of it is irritation with that led to the It's Our Community project, because it seems to me like people who want to improve society need to start recognizing how important social care is to that, but their image of what social care is or could be needs to be radically different to the kind of commodified, service-based, institutional kind of models that have become so prevalent. And we've already run a program around the experience of disabled adults and of older people. This is our 3rd event, but so much is consistent across all of those stories. And we've heard so many rich explorations of kind of what's wrong and what's missing. And what's missing, again, there's tons of things, tons of ways of thinking about this, but the concept of neighbourhood, which is right there in the middle of the childfare state that Kathy explained, is really what we're honing in on. We're saying, like, that is so fundamentally missing. We need to start afresh on that. At a local authority level, we're, Opus, who runs the Festival Debate and is our partner in this, and Citizen Network Research are based in Sheffield. And we're proud of Sheffield, although Sheffield is not at the moment singing and dancing organisationally. We would love to help it be better. And so we focused our efforts on that. We actually we've had at the previous two sessions leadership from Sheffield, and this one they didn't accept our invites, which is a bit disappointing. But the message is really that many of these changes can be made now. And so we're hoping to try and, through this process, start to get people to think about, there's some doable things. If you just drop your assumption that you know best, if you commit to neighbourhoods and you start help growing the structures that are kind of, as Angela describes, often they've been eroded by bad government policy over the years, but we're all there. We still live in these places, that we know where we are. And so we think that there's hope there. But the thing I'm most hopeful about is the work that we're doing, and Angela is leading with us, but around the neighbourhood democracy movement. I think if we're going to make a breakthrough, it will be because neighbourhoods themselves wake up to what they are, and all of the truth that runs through all of the presentations. But, and Cormac put very powerfully at the beginning, the truth of the absolute essential requirement that neighbourhoods exist and flourish, and that everything else is just basically an empty sham unless we get that right. That truth is true, but it's like a true nobody's owning. I think if neighbourhoods start to own it and organise around it, then that's one of the most hopeful strategies. So that's what we're kind of committed to through Citizen Network and our work both locally and globally. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much, Simon. Now, invite Tim, Angela and Harriet back, if that's all right, and we'll just have a bit of a chat and a bit of a kind of wider...
Isn't Kathy coming back as well?
Yes, and Kathy as well, yeah. If you'd like to turn your video and microphone back on, Kathy, as well. Thank you, everyone. We'll try and have a sort of a rather free-flowing sort of conversation in this sort of last 25 minutes, but maybe I'll ask a question. Maybe this sort of stems on a little bit from what Simon just said. We live in one of the most sort of centralised, countries in Europe and across the world. A lot of power and resources are centralised, but obviously the social care budget is one of the things that has evolved to, local authorities. And for those of us who are in the business of making change, it's no surprise that there is lots of inertia, but you would have thought that perhaps local authorities would be more keen to be able to pick up on this work and have the ability to be a little bit more flexible, or maybe look at some of these sort of new solutions. And I just wondered if you had a perspective on why perhaps that some of these things aren't getting through. Kathy, go for it.
Well, this is where I've kind of years of trying to unpick how funding actually works has become something that I don't think should define. I don't think if we threw money at improving social care, that's what would improve it. But the starvation of councils financially has impacted directly on every part of community service and social care, as it's more formally called. But one of the things that very few people really understood is that there is no budget delegated to councils for social care, not adult or child. So, and this is quite different. It took me years to really kind of understand it. This is quite different from, so schools, there is a national formula, whatever you think of it, and it comes to the locality badged as this is the money for running your schools, and the school knows that that's the school budget. It's similar with some other, it used to be similar with early intervention for budget that also included Sure Start funding, but for certainly for children's social care, and I think I'm right in saying for adult social care, the funds that largely paid for both kinds of social care 10 years ago had absolutely no string or title or ring fence described as for social care. And in fact, it was largely derived from the revenue support grant, which would come via Westminster to council saying, you know, here's your bit of funding to do what councils have to do. And it would actually have to cover children's social care and any community service commissioning surrounding that, adult social care, bins, waste management, all sorts of other things. So the revenue support grant was a redistribution mechanism that didn't have ring fences inside it. So somebody, we know, I mean, it started in 2010 and then it doubled down in 2015, decided that instead of being the arterial blood vessel to councils delivering on their duties, this was a dependency mechanism that councils were depending on Whitehall to bail them out. So over 10 years, Whitehall changed the kind of the, not just the fact and the amount of revenue support grant, but the whole idea of what it was. It was a system designed to get taxes to the places where those duties are met. And they turned it into a handout that councils shouldn't be allowed to rely on anymore. So they did to councils what they did to families in terms of saying you shouldn't take this for granted, and it definitely shouldn't be enough for you to not be aware. And they cast that as councils needing to be stimulated to generate more income locally, because in this new framing of council funding, councils should be raising all their money locally. Getting any from Westminster is kind of being insufficiently entrepreneurial. So that is how the poorest areas got the deepest cuts and are left with the least income raising possibility. But the actual service provision that is most hit by that is social care, because it never came with a social care budget label attached to it. So one of the things we've had to do in our campaigning is to explain all of that. Lots of senior officials in councils didn't really understand that. If they weren't actually managing the finance flows, but trying to work out how to spread a budget, they didn't know that stuff that was happening in Whitehall at comprehensive spending review means all of these cuts are going to be paid for from social care. Then you get these little dishonest top-ups about precepts being more funding for social care when they are simply permission to raise more funds from the local community to plug the cuts that are hitting the local community. So sorry to kind of get into the nitty-gritty, but we're into such complex territory in a world in which no part of social care system design has designated the right funding mechanism to fund social care. It's an afterthought, and it's gone down the drain first.
And of course, the more complexity there is, the less transparency in how these things are understood.
Absolutely.
Simon, was that your hand up, and then we'll go to Harriet?
Well, it's building on Cathy said, but I would add a layer of culture here. Well, I think of colonialism, really. I've got a book in front of me here, The Great Troubled Families Fraud. When the coalition government came in, they declared that there would be extra money for troubled families, and all local authorities then set about converting their requests for funding into a request for funding for troubled families, which is a totally horrible, eugenic influenced framing of government policy. But local authorities are desperate, and they're desperate for the money, but they're also desperate, I suppose, for status, for attention. I think when you get to the level of what's going on inside these systems, what's striking is how little space there is for free thought, for research, for really thinking things through. There's no democratic accountability anyway of any meaning. So, you know, in a way it sounds nice, Joe, like local government is responsible for social care along with the bins and the roads, but it's meaningless at every level. In adult social care, actually now they're so dependent on NHS funding to top up social care funding that they're really in the pockets of the NHS, it's controlled from Whitehall. So it is, sorry to be a bit despairing. That's partly why I think in the end, I personally, I'm I only see the really hopeful way is organising at a different level, because I just don't see local government being a vehicle for transformational change at this point in our kind of history.
To you, Harriet.
Yeah. So I just wanted to come in as well. I think sort of adding on to that, and we've discussed about such well, kind of we know what we need to do, but and it's quite simple in a way, but also quite profound kind of system change and social change. But I do think a campaigning focus could also be kind of Munro's idea of an entitlement to early help, because obviously local authorities have to prioritise where they've got statutory duties in the allocation of their spending in relation to children's social care and support for disabled children, etc. And they're not, you know, lots of local authorities aren't, you know, they're not managing to do that. There's been increasing court cases around special educational needs and support for disabled children, etc. But they do have to prioritise their statutory duties. So getting it's legalistically, in a legal sense, there needs to be a lot of development of this idea, but whether it's an entitlement to early help, to social support, the European Union is talking about a child guarantee that it's encouraging member states to introduce, and that's about an entitlement to not living in poverty, for families to have decent family-friendly employment opportunities that don't have a big knock-on effect in terms of reduced income and prospects, and for there to be quality family support and children's services. So it's a 3-pillar child guarantee, and they're trying to encourage that to be translated into, you know, formal legal social rights kind of thing, or whether it's through the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, because as a society we can gather round more across political divides in terms of kind of improving things for children in a social sense, not necessarily a governmental sense. So I think adding to this you know, vision and agenda in terms of children's social care reform, I think we could also have quite a clear kind of campaigning strategy around improving rights, and then therefore statutory duties at a level below, you know, at the lower level of social care and social support, and at the early help and family support level.
So I think there's something about, we want things to be sexy as well, don't we? So I think when we're trying to change things, like a really common thing, Angela, you know, we've got some money, let's create a new bunch of social workers who are going to be more expert than the ones we already pay for. Or we've got the Wigan deal, or the Lancashire hot pot, or the Leeds pie, or whatever the kind of sexy thing is, that like we can't trust the people who we already employ. This stuff that we did in Middlesbrough years ago, now it was like, we've got some social workers, most of them are brilliant. We've broken them over years with all the crap we pile on them. A really simple idea was, we spend shitloads of money sending kids away. Let's have a look at how we could spend that a bit differently to keep them at home. Dead straightforward, really simple, really effective. Like the number of looked after children in Middlesbrough dropped. The budget that we used to, the overspent budget that we used to overspend on constantly, was used in a much more flexible, creative way. And then, you know, 3 months later, we're not doing that anymore, because we're doing the Middlesbrough thing, it's called now. It's a sexy new thing. Forget all the great people we've spent millions of pounds employing. They're all rubbish. We need an expert from the outside to tell her to do it better, differently. So I think there's some of that as well.
Good.
Yeah, and I think, well, I'm going to go back to the neighbourhood, because that's where I live, and that's where I feel most comfortable. And you know, I think that really resonated with me, Tim, because I just wish my council had been more honest. You know, instead of, and I wish we could get rid of this kind of reputational management thing, and this kind of like, who's got the most awards. Because I think if we'd have been more honest, then perhaps we might be in a different place and be more together. I think the lack of honesty has bred some polarisation in place, and I think it's also stopped us thinking about what we could do together. And instead, my local authority has turned itself into a business, and like many other local authorities similar to mine, like, we're giving away our land. We're like, we'll sell you our assets. So areas that have least money and have been more, you know, if they'd have ever said in Wigan, like, we are the most hit local authority in the country. But what they did instead was said, we're reframing cuts as efficiencies and we're creating the Wigan deal, which hopefully, in line with trickle-down economics, what we'll do is we'll act as consultants and we'll go to other councils and we'll get paid to transform them. And then the money that we bring in will sort us all out. And they forgot that actually, you know, there's a lot of gift, skill, talent and passion in Wigan. And we don't want to be like, you know, the plan is at the minute. You know, towns are not the new cities. We're a town that's always looked after each other. And instead of taking us back to our roots, they're turning us into the market.
Just going to bring in one comment that Joy Bullivant made in the chat. She said, education policies such as push to make locally controlled schools academies has meant many disabled children have lost places in mainstream schools and the support they need. Does anyone else would like to comment on that, or does that chime with experiences or things that you've seen?
Well, I certainly agree that I mean, on several levels, the whole mechanism for diving into a community and saying, you know, because this school isn't good enough, we're going to take it over. It will be managed by DFE and we'll bring in people who don't know the community at all, and that will be better. That is already a business proposition, as Angela was just describing as well. You know, it's already a business proposition, and education, particularly creating a school community, is not a business. And so you know, this is where markets management, managerialism is one of the many forms of it. It suggests that improving a school is a business strategy, therefore is better done by people who are better at the business of running schools elsewhere. So let's create kind of chains of branded specialists at sorting out schools no matter where they are, irrespective of geography. I mean, firstly, that's terrible. And secondly, it has the very predictable, terrible effect of seeing a disabled child or any child who's struggling academically for perfectly valid reasons as poor raw material for our business outcomes. If we can control the raw material, we can get the sort of the desired productivity measures, which are their grades. So, you know, and there were actually guides that were written early on for potential multi-academy trusts that were basically saying one of the most important things to you acing it as a school is to control your input, and by input they meant children. Like so it's a I couldn't agree more with what was stated there. And there are huge, I mean, there are huge impacts. It's a really good example of where public management is just taking us down lanes that have stopped pretending to be about a child's right to an education.
Thank you, Kathy. Simon?
Well, I think I noticed, I saw, as friends in Sheffield now, I'm obsessed by this question of neighbourhoods. And I found this list of neighbourhoods, and there are 142 neighbourhoods. And then I'd discovered by watching Sheffield TV that, and a fact I should have known, there are 140 primary schools. And then it kind of clicked, all right, like the primary school is pretty much like, and that chimes with Mike's, you know, I know where my son went to primary school. I know actually that some of our best friends were there. Do you know what I mean? So it's inclusive education is one of the things that should be on the agenda. Inclusion generally should be on our agenda. Actually, my sense is that one of the things we should be trying to do through this, it's our community project, is get people to think we can't afford to lose people. They're our real gift, the people. We shouldn't be throwing people away. And if we could start to get people, is I think almost taking over the schools. I mean, in a sense, the whole decline of secondary education is part of what's going on here. I mean, our education system is buggered, multiply buggered. My son, sorry, this is a bit of an anecdote, but it really shocked me, and I'm not easily shocked. One of our friend's daughters She got a teaching assistant job. She went in to teach classes in secondary school for kids at a very significant level, like teaching Spanish. She doesn't know Spanish. She's just given a book to go through, and the kids have got to go. So, like, we've killed our education system anyway. That's terrible. But and hence our declining educational performance internationally, and hence our growing mental illness for kids, because we really fucked it up. Sorry, but in a way that's an opportunity. Like, let's start again. Let's start saying, what does it look like when we say, well, there are kids, it's our school. Let's make sure all the kids stay here, grow up here, get jobs here. We're living at a time when actually this whole idea of everybody's going to go to London, to go and get COVID. Do you know, like, there's a lot of us, I think, are just like, let's change the horizon in which we're thinking and planning and creating. Let's throw out these assumptions that, you know, the successful child leaves your neighborhood because they went to the big school or they went to the university. Let's say, no, we want people to stay here. That's how our neighborhoods flourish. I'm not going to hold on to people if they really want to leave, but our attitude should be, this is our place. We want everybody to stay here. We want the money that's being spent to be spent here. Like, the social care budget is 3.5 million per neighborhood. There are 11,000 neighborhoods in England. That money is being spent on private care with profits going to the Caribbean. Let's have it all back in our neighborhoods, investing in ourselves. And you could carry that story right through the welfare state and say, right, let's make the welfare state all hyper-local, because there's not much of it that needs to be in a big hospital. Most of it needs to be in people's hands and in people's streets and in people's arms, like Angela says, like in our arms, so we can take care of it, because they sure as hell aren't taking care of it. And they haven't for about 4 decades at least, arguably longer. It was not really designed, it was designed by eugenicists like Beveridge in the assumption that people in London knew how we should all live, and they were going to organize life around that assumption, right? Well, that was a terrible, bloody assumption. We know how we should live, and we know how to take care of each other. Let's work around that assumption. Let's design around that assumption, not the broken assumptions of 1945. Sorry, that turned into a rant. I didn't expect that. But.
That's all right. It was. It's always great to hear one of your rants, Simon. I mean, you know, and I think essentially, isn't it? It's coming back to the principle of kindness, isn't it? It's about how do we be kind to each other, and how do we support each other.
Can I just add one of the examples of the ideas that children and young people had in the childfare state around school? You know, they were all very balanced. They weren't saying I hate school, get rid of it, Pink Floyd, etc. They were saying, like, we would really like schools to be completely porous with the community. So they had ideas like community days at school, where people from the community come in and teach them their stuff. Or they had community days as like 1 day a week. We shouldn't be in this building. We should all be out doing stuff in the community. And that wasn't because they're sort of brought up ideologically to the idea that to ideas of community. That to them was just quite obvious, because this is where I live. If this is my school, why doesn't anyone from the community around me come into it? And why don't we go out in it?
Maybe building a little bit on, we've just got a few minutes left. There was, you know, Annalisa was talking earlier about how a lot of the adoption agencies or organisations, you know, they didn't have adoptees or on their boards or necessarily in some of those organisations. How is it with, you know, I suppose, you know, with social care, you know, should there be, you know, an evolution of governance right at the top that people, you know, with lived experience of care need to be sort of in the leadership positions for things to change?
I mean, sorry. I mean, one thing is, how many of these social care organisations do we really need? I mean, it's almost like, so when I started my career, sorry, I just jumped in, Joe. When I started my career, I know you just get another rant here, but when I started my career, I worked for a community organisation. By 1992, that was a commissioned organisation. And by about 1996, it was a national organisation. Why was it a national organisation? Because it was desperate to work outside Southwark? No, because it was threatened by the competitive market mechanisms that if it didn't get business outside Southwark, it would die. And we have, over the last 30 years, converted community organisations into social care providers. We need to stop, we need to rewind the clock, and we need to go back to community organisations. And when you start focusing on the neighbourhood, like if you look at the stats, for a neighbourhood of say 5,000 people, there are only probably about 150 folk, and that's being reasonably generous, with significant social care needs. The scale of things changes. So you don't need a learning disability provider, a mental health provider, and in fact, what of any of those things do you really need? I mean, this is a very radical thing to say in a world stuffed full of underfunded but eager for money organizations with big egos and brands. But really, I'm not quite sure what we need. I think we need a fresh think about what neighborhoods really need, not necessarily to change the governance of all of these organizations, because I think the organizations are now the wrong shape, the wrong size, in the wrong place, doing the wrong work. Sorry.
I'm just going to mention a few of the comments in the chat and then maybe go for some last comments if anyone would like to mention them. I just noticed the person who's posting under the Crag project team talked about who is holding these systems to account at both a national and a local level for the hurt and harm that's been done in the name of corporate conformity. And Sarah Edmondson also talking about how, you know, if there was some honesty about the situation and we weren't so worried about protecting the reputation of local authorities and got out of the way of communities, I'm confident communities will be able to provide a solution. And again, there's a comment about, you know, in response to your rant, Simon, about what universities or professional networks are going to relinquish that power and resources to enable this neighbourhood-owned vision to come to fruition. Maybe go some final comments if you haven't had any. Harriet, have you anything you'd like to sort of close out on? I'll go to Angela, Tim, and Kath and Simon as well.
No, nothing further to add. I just think there's, we've got so many important key ideas and knowledge here to take forward. It's kind of putting it all together and carrying on campaigning and really pushing. It's not, as the comments kind of suggest, we are talking about profound social change and we're talking about challenging power relations. It's a fight. It's not, this social change isn't going to happen very easily, but it is happening. And I think it's been really good for me at this session just to be reminded about that core around care and love and recognition, but also empowerment, community, neighbourhood empowerment, collaborations, partnerships, having voice and influence, and rethinking what communities need and how to really push forward for that.
Great, thank you. And Angela or Tim, would you like any final comments?
I've spent the last 30 years working as an alongside-er, either in neighbourhoods, or within systems. And I've just decided that until I'm a granny and I drive away in the motorhome somewhere, I do really believe that neighbourhood is the primary unit of change and growing the power there to do something different. And so I'm just going to give that a shot and work alongside friends who want to be on that journey together through the neighbourhood democracy movement, because I think that's the only way we can hold it up to challenge is at a local level. It becomes too big once you get outside your neighbourhood, doesn't it?
Great, thank you, Angela.
And then I'm part of that Community Power Act, we're our ear group as well, so that over there. But really, I think the secret sauce is in the neighbourhood, where it's sexier than the big sexer.
I think we'll all drink from that secret sauce with you. Tim, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's something grubby about neighbourhoods which I really like. I think that's where stuff happens, isn't it? I was I'm just thinking about all these massive changes that have come and all the money that's been invested in social work particularly, right? I witnessed a social work assessment, which must be like an asset-based one. So this was true. So it was social worker asking a bloke that I've got, massive respect for. And anyway, so the conversation went, so what are your hobbies and interests? And he told us some. Oh, that's interesting. Now about your toileting. Do you ever have any accidents? And that was seriously, that was like, I must have witnessed some amazing transformational social work there. So I think I get down grubby communities. I've just started supporting, the organisation I work for has just started supporting a grubby community market in a really smelly old train station. Because that sounds like a good thing to have a bash at, see what happens with that, rather than some sexy new programme. So yeah, that's my final thought.
Great, thanks, Tim. I'll go to you next, Kathy, and I'll give the final word to Simon.
I was still thinking about that question about governance and people with lived experience, direct lived experience, and it's obviously a huge live issue. There's lots of inequality and patronising and belittling and power between those whose expertise is from that lived experience being seen as secondary or kind of other from other kinds of expertise. So firstly, we've kind of got to be equalizing about respecting each person's knowledge, wherever it comes from. And we should be expecting to see far more people. My experience in children's social care is that there are far more people working in it as adults who are care experienced as children than feel safe or necessarily wanting to make that connection revealed. And I think that's true. It's certainly true in some charities, and the governance and the people who work professionally within charities, I know. Somehow we've got to say it's really important to know that they're there, but we can't demand of people to share their personal trauma in order to make sure that they are. And I think that's one I still go round and round, because I don't want a systemic approach that says, tell us your trauma and you will get into the conversation. And we tried very hard to avoid doing that with the young people that we brought together. Their experience was what made them the experts we wanted to listen to. But then we asked them about changing the system for everyone based on what they cared about, rather than saying, if you've experienced, if you're a wheelchair user, we assume you'll want to tell us how to make society more accessible for your disability. And none of them followed their experience pathway in the issues that they most focused on.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Kathy. And final thoughts from you, Simon.
I just go back to Molly and Claire a bit, because they both are members of PFG Doncaster. PFG Doncaster is the thing that makes me smile despite our Tory government. Like I can get on with this work because they exist. And what is the key? What is the magic sauce there? People helping each other, people helping people as people, and out of that, sometimes the term peer support, which they use and I think is really helpful, has this flavour of it's people with some label helping similar people with the same label or something like that, and it's kind of put in a little box. All right. But what they've done is thrown all the labels away and broken down the box, and they've gone into their communities and they're transforming mental health services. They're transforming their neighbourhoods. They're not allowing any of those stupid labels and silos to limit their way of thinking about the future. And that's what keeps me cheerful. And that thread, which I found run through all of the talks today, that helps me feel positive. So we don't know how to do what we hope to do, but there are a tremendous load of brilliant people out there doing it. And there's something about connecting those things together and seeing the bigger vision without taking it over, without but something about the connection and the networking that we can do collectively that I'm excited about for the future.
Great, thank you, Simon. And for anyone watching in the present or in the future, if you want to stay up to date with the work that we're doing, you can visit the Citizen Network website, and there'll also be details of some of the speakers and their organisations on the text description of this on YouTube as well, so you can find out a little bit more about them and the great work that they do as well. That's it. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. Special thanks to all of our guests that have spoken today, which includes Molly and Claire from the People Focus Group, Cormac Russell, Katrina Robson, Annalisa Tuccaro, Harriet Churchill, Kathy Evans, Tim Keilty, Angela Fell, Simon Duffy. I think I've got everyone there. Yes, but yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining us. See you next time. Cheers, bye-bye.